We're going to look at punctuation just really quick as a quick review so you can have these notes in your notebooks. We're going to look at periods, commas, exclamation marks, question marks, quotation marks, and apostrophes, and then do a little practice with them. So the first one we're going to look at is the period. We know that we're supposed to use those at the end of a complete sentence. Looking at our example here, we watched a movie after eating dinner. Okay, we have our period right here, and we know it's a complete sentence because we have a subject, we, and a verb. Watched. Okay, if we were to look at a text and need to add a period, what we could do is put our period with a circle around it. That's how we could mark that we are adding a period into some text. Next one is our comma. Commas show a pause. That doesn't look like an S at all. Commas show a pause within a sentence, or commas separate items in a list. So in our example here, we've got a comma for a pause and commas for a list. This morning, I gave my mom a card, flowers, and chocolates. Okay, this one shows our pause. This morning, I gave my mom. Okay, and then the other two show that we are separating items in a list. If we're going to have a list, we have to have at least 3 items. What I mean by that is if we were to say, this morning I gave my mom a card and flowers, if we took out that third item in the list, we wouldn't use a comma. We would say, I gave my mom a card and flowers. Okay, but since we are using more than 3 items, we are going to use commas, since we're using 3 items, we're going to use those commas to separate those items in that list. If we needed to add a comma, we could simply put our comma here where it needs to go in the sentence. Okay, and then what I like to use is something called a caret, and that is kind of like a triangle without the bottom. So if we were to add a comma into a sentence somewhere, we would just go to where it needs to be in the sentence, and we could, I gave my mom a card, jewelry, flowers, and chocolates. Okay, so if we wanted to add in a comma and use a caret, we could put a caret here and the comma there. Okay, and then it just adds in that comma into the list. It makes it a little bit more noticeable than only drawing a comma. All right, then we have our exclamation mark. We use those at the end of a sentence to show excitement, or strong feelings. Looking at our example, it says, "This is the most delicious cake I've ever tasted." Now, I know that if I am eating cake and I'm really enjoying it, I'm going to be excited about it. So I would use an exclamation mark there. Same thing goes if we wanted to add one in to a sentence. We would use a caret and an exclamation mark. Basically, anytime you're using a caret, you are just showing that you are inserting something. It doesn't have to be the comma. It doesn't have to be the exclamation mark. Maybe you need to add a letter or a different type of punctuation. You would just use the caret and then write down whatever it is that you're adding underneath it. All right, next one is our question mark. We use those at the end of a sentence when we're asking a question. So, when is the homework due? Question mark. Notice a lot of times when we're asking a question, we're going to start our sentences with things like when, why, how, where, who, okay. What is also another one. Who, what, when, where, why. So it's the 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, why, and then how, the 1H. Those are your key words for using a question mark. When you are starting a sentence with one of those, you want to use a question mark at the end of your sentence. Okay, again, same thing. If we need to add one in, we can use a caret to do so. All right, quotation marks. They can get confusing. They show dialogue or direct quotes from a text. Now, dialogue is just a fancy word to say that people are talking or having a conversation. We're going to pretend this doesn't say name right there. Ignore that. Okay, so dialogue is the same as conversation. So anytime somebody is speaking, then you would put quotation marks around what they are saying. The second part where I'm saying quotes, I'm just saying if you are quoting a source, if you are getting your information from a text somewhere, you want to quote it directly and put quotation marks around it. That way you're showing that you are not stealing what you are saying. You are quoting someone else and giving them credit. So looking at our example, she replied, "Thank you for the gift." Okay, so notice the space, all the words in between the quotation marks is something that is being said. Okay. And again, to add quotes, well, you don't have to necessarily use a caret for quotation marks. Okay. So when you're doing those, what I would say, just to make it more noticeable, like you do a period, draw your marks and put circles around them. Now notice we're using 2 marks in each. If you just use one, then you're not using a quotation mark. Okay, and lastly, I can't get my screen to zoom out. Awesome. There we go. An apostrophe. We use those in contractions or when we are showing possession. Our examples here, our first one, we'll have dessert when the movie is over. That one is a contraction. The reason it's a contraction is because we have joined 2 words together. So instead of it being just will, it's standing for we will. Okay, so other contractions would be don't, weren't, wasn't, aren't. Okay, things like that. They are joining two things together. Do not, are not, was not, were not. They'll, they will. Okay, so we use an apostrophe to join those two words together to make a contraction. And then the second one is possession. That's when we are showing ownership. Okay, so I'm marking this here so we know the difference between the two examples. Okay, and notice it's Sarah's notebook. If we didn't have an apostrophe here, it would sound like we're talking about more than one Sarah. Okay, but we're only talking about one Sarah. And since we're talking about the notebook that belongs to her, we use our apostrophe to mark that. When we're inserting an apostrophe, a lot of times we're going to use a caret upside down, and that may not always be the case, but a lot of times we will. That's a very bad apostrophe. I'm going to redraw that. Okay, so I use a caret upside down for apostrophes. Okay, most times that's how it's going to be because the caret or the apostrophe is going to go on the top side of the letters instead of on the bottom. Okay, so if you are adding like your punctuation, your comma, or anything like that, then notice I've got the caret going upward, and that's because the punctuation is going to go to meet the bottom of the line, whereas your apostrophe is going to meet the top of your word. That may not make any sense, and that's okay. It's not a huge deal. That's just me being nitpicky. All right, so I can't get my screen to work with me. It's fine, guys. All right. You need to make your notes look like mine. And then you are going to complete the assignment that I have for you. Use these notes on that assignment.